The gold-trimmed telephone on the president's desk was still working, but there was no one left on the other end of the line. Inside Saigon's Independence Palace, on the morning of the 30th of April 1975, a newly sworn-in president sat in near total silence, waiting for an invading army to arrest him. Outside, the world's most heavily documented war was rushing toward its final, chaotic seconds. Yet, inside these high-ceilinged corridors, time seemed to stretch into an agonizing crawl. How did a modern fortress built to withstand supersonic jet strikes transform into a quiet stage where a handful of men waited to hand over the callans, keys to an entire nation? For days, the grand halls, designed by architect Ngo, Viet had been emptying of their powerful occupants. The frantic packing of files, the hurried departures of generals, and the thick smell of burning documents in the courtyard had all given way to an eerie, suspended stillness. Only a skeleton crew of politicians, aides, and guards remained, listening to the distant, rhythmic thud of artillery closing in on the capital. The palace, which had stood as the absolute nerve center of the Republic of Vietnam, was suddenly operating in a vacuum. President Duong van Minh, widely known as Big Minh, sat with his Prime Minister, Vu Van Mao, and a small group of cabinet members. They were dressed in formal suits, looking more like diplomats, attending a routine state function than leaders witnessing the final hours of their state. They knew that the city was surrounded by hundreds of thousands of North Vietnamese troops, and they knew that no foreign intervention was coming to save them. The silence inside the palace was not just the absence of sound, it was the weight of an impending historical pivot. Every tick of the grandfather clocks in the reception rooms seemed to signal the end of an era. The men inside could only wait, caught between the fear of immediate violence and the desperate hope that their final act of surrender might spare their city from a devastating final battle. Outside the gates, the city of Saigon was in a state of suspended animation, caught between the old world that was vanishing and the new one that was rapidly approaching. The palace itself, a symbol of authority and resistance, had become a gilded cage for those who remained. The yellow carpets, the empty offices, the abandoned switchboards, all of these physical elements spoke of a sudden dramatic halt to a regime that had lasted for decades. The silence was heavy, thick, with the realization that whatever happened next would be recorded in the history books forever. It was a silence that carried the echoes of millions of lives lost, of decades of bitter struggle, and of a future that was entirely unwritten. As the morning light filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the empty reception halls, the remaining officials could only exchange quiet glances, fully aware that their names would soon be written into the final chapter of a long and painful war. They knew that the eyes of the world were turned toward this single building, waiting to see how the final act of this decades-long drama would play out on the global stage. To understand how the palace arrived at this moment of absolute isolation, we must look back at the dizzying speed of the preceding 50 days. The collapse of the Southern Front had begun in earnest in mid-March 1975, following the unexpected loss of Ban Mi Thuot in the Central Highlands. What started as a strategic withdrawal, ordered by President Nguyen Van Thieu, quickly spiraled into a catastrophic retreat. Major cities along the coast fell in rapid succession. Hue and Da Nang, once thought to be impregnable bastions of the Republic of Vietnam, armed forces were lost in a matter of weeks, leaving vast quantities of military equipment behind and sending hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing southward in desperate search of safety. By mid-April, the North Vietnamese forces, organized under the massive Ho Chi Minh campaign, had advanced to the outer defense lines of Saigon. At Xuan Loc, a small town 30 miles gateway to the capital, ARVN forces under General Le Minh Dao put up a fierce, desperate resistance, holding back the advance for nearly 2 weeks. But the sheer weight of numbers and resources was overwhelming. When Xuan Lock finally fell on April 21, the road to Saigon was wide open. That same evening, President Nguyen Van Thieu resigned in a bitter, televised address, accusing the United States of failing to honor its solemn commitments to defend the South. He was succeeded briefly by the aging and ailing Vice President Tran Van Quang. But as the military situation grew more desperate by the hour, it became clear that Quang could not negotiate with the opposing side, who refused to deal with any remnant of the Thieu administration. On April 28, in a final, desperate political maneuver, the presidency was transferred to Duong Van Minh. Minh was a retired general who had played a key role in the 1963 coup against No Din Diem. He was seen as a moderate figure who had long advocated for a third force solution and reconciliation with the North. It was hoped that his appointment might open a path to a negotiated ceasefire, preventing a bloody, street-by-street battle for Saigon. But by the time Minh took the oath of office, the time for negotiation had already run out. The 5 North Vietnamese Army Corps surrounding the city had no intention of stopping. They were poised for a total military victory, and the palace was their ultimate destination. Every diplomatic channel had closed, and the international community had largely turned its back, leaving the new president to preside over a state that was rapidly dissolving around him. The rapid disintegration of the armed forces and the swift advance of the northern divisions left the political leadership in Saigon with virtually no leverage, forcing them to confront the stark reality of complete military defeat. As the sun rose on April 30, the finality of the situation became undeniable. Only hours earlier, at approximately 4:45 a.m., the last American helicopter had lifted off from the roof of the United States Embassy, just blocks away from the palace. The departure of Ambassador Graham Martin marked the end of the official American presence, leaving the remaining South Vietnamese leadership entirely on their own. The streets of Saigon were a scene of chaotic transition, filled with abandoned military uniforms, discarded weapons, and civilians unsure of what the next hour would bring. Inside the Independence Palace, President Duong Van Minh made a crucial decision to prevent the complete destruction of Saigon and the loss of countless civilian lives. He ordered all remaining ARVN forces to cease fire and halt all resistance. At 10:20 a.m., Minh's voice went out over the radio, announcing that the government was ready to hand over power peacefully to the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam. He called on his soldiers to lay down their arms to avoid further bloodshed. Meanwhile, the vanguard of the People's Army of Vietnam was entering the city limits. The 203rd Armored Brigade, attached to the 2nd Corps, was leading the drive toward the heart of Saigon. Their primary objective was the Saigon Independence Palace, the ultimate symbol of state power. The tank crews, commandos, and infantrymen did not possess detailed, up-to-date maps of the Dai sprawling southern capital. Instead, they relied on basic tourist maps and, in many cases, directions shouted by local Saigon residents who stood on the sidewalks, watching the armored columns roll past. The lead elements of the WW Brigade, including Type 59 Tank Number 390 and T-54 Tank Number 843, sped down the wide avenues, navigating through abandoned military vehicles and barricades. Their crews focused entirely on reaching the palace gates before the day was out. The tension inside the tanks was palpable. They did not know if they would encounter sudden resistance or if the path would remain clear. Every intersection was a potential ambush, yet they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that they were minutes away from ending a war that had lasted for decades. The rhythmic clanking of their treads echoed off the buildings of downtown Saigon, a metallic countdown to a moment that would redefine the geopolitical landscape of Southeast Asia forever. The crews pushed their machines to their limits, knowing that every second mattered in these final decisive moments of the campaign. At approximately 11:30 a.m., the roar of heavy diesel engines shattered the silence of the frayed, tree-lined boulevard leading directly to the Independence Palace. Tank 843, commanded by Lieutenant Quang, was the first to reach the palace's perimeter. The tank veered toward the side gate of the compound, attempting to ram through, but it became wedged against the sturdy iron pillar. Seeing this, Tank 390, commanded by Vu Dang Toan, accelerated past its sister vehicle. It drove directly at the main ornamental iron gates of the palace. With a deafening crash of metal against metal, Tank 390 smashed the gates off their hinges, flattening them onto the driveway and charging onto the manicured lawns. This physical breach of the palace gates was the definitive, unscripted climax of the war. Lieutenant Quang jumped down from his stalled tank, carrying the blue and red flag with its central gold star of the National Liberation Front. He ran across the lawn and through the grand entrance of the Quay Palace, navigating the unfamiliar corridors until he found an elevator, and then the stairs leading to the roof. At exactly 11:30 a.m., he lowered the flag of the flag, Republic of Vietnam, and raised the liberation flag, signaling to the entire city that the conflict was over. Downstairs, the scene was equally dramatic. PAVN soldiers and officers, led by political officer Bui Van Tung and other commanders, entered the main reception room. They found President Duong Van, Minh, Prime Minister Vu Van Mao, and about 30 other cabinet officials, waiting for them. Minh stood up as the officers entered. He looked at them and said, "I have been waiting since early this morning to transfer power to you." Bui Van Tung, looking at the assembled cabinet, replied with words that would define the transition. "Your power has collapsed. You cannot hand over what you do not have. You can only surrender unconditionally." These words marked the end of the Republic of Vietnam. The transition was not marked by a formal, polite signing ceremony, but by a stark, realistic exchange that reflected the absolute military reality on the ground. The physical structure of the palace, which had stood for years as a symbol of power, was now under new management, and the men who had run the country were now prisoners of war. It was a moment of immense political and historical gravity, captured by foreign journalists who had remained in the city, providing the world with an immediate, front-row seat to the dramatic conclusion of the conflict. The images of those tanks breaching the gates would soon flash across television screens and newspaper front pages worldwide, cementing this specific moment as the visual shorthand for the end of an era. The tension in the room did not explode into violence. Instead, it dissolved into a series of highly practical, urgent tasks. The immediate priority was to broadcast the surrender to the rest of the country to prevent any further isolated pockets of fighting. Bui Van Tung and other officers escorted President Duong Van Minh and Prime Minister Vu Van Mao out of the palace and into waiting military vehicles. They were driven directly to the Saigon radio station, located just a short distance away on Nguyen Bin Kim Street. The radio station was empty, its staff having fled, but the equipment was quickly brought back online with the help of technicians. Inside the small broadcasting studio, Bui Van Tung drafted the text of the unconditional surrender on a sheet of notebook paper. Duong Van Minh read the statement into the microphone, his voice carrying across the nation, officially declaring the dissolution of the Saigon administration at all levels. Immediately following Minh's broadcast, Bui Van Tung took microphone to read the acceptance of the surrender on behalf of the liberation forces, declaring that peace had been restored to Vietnam. Back at the Independence Palace, the atmosphere began to shift from the high-stakes drama of military capture to one of curious observation. Soldiers from the incoming forces explored the grand rooms, marveling at the modern architecture, the presidential living quarters, and the extensive underground bunker system. Outside, the streets of Saigon began to fill with people. While many residents remained anxious in their homes. Others ventured out to witness the historic sight of the tanks parked on the palace lawns. The transition was remarkably orderly, with very little of the widespread looting or destruction that had characterized the fall of other major cities during the final weeks of the war. The city was beginning to adjust to a new reality, one that was completely different from anything its residents had known for a generation. The immediate threat of a bloody battle for the streets of Saigon had been averted, and for many, that was a source of profound relief, even amidst the deep uncertainty of what the future would hold under the new government. As night fell over the city, the silence returned to the palace grounds, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had hung over the building just 12 hours earlier. It was the quiet of a city beginning its long, uncertain journey toward recovery. The physical structure of the palace, though scarred by the day's dramatic events, remained standing as a silent witness to the dawn of a completely new historical epoch. The events of the 30th of April 1975, inside the Independence Palace, represent far more than just the military conclusion of a campaign. They marked the end of a 30-year struggle that had begun in the wake of World War II, a conflict that had drawn in the world's most powerful nations and cost millions of Vietnamese lives. The image of the tanks crashing through the palace gates became a global symbol of the end of the Vietnam War, an event that reshaped international relations, military strategy, and the collective memory of an entire generation. For Vietnam, this moment represented the realization of a long-held goal of national reunification, bringing an end to the division of the country that had been established by the Geneva Accords in 1954. However, the day also marked the beginning of a complex and difficult process of integration. The physical reunification of the country was achieved quickly, but the social, economic, and psychological healing of a nation divided by decades of civil and international conflict would take much longer. The preservation of the Independence Palace, renamed Reunification Hall, serves as a physical reminder of this complex history. It stands today not as a monument to a single perspective, but as a site where visitors from all over the world, including those who fought on opposing sides, can walk through the preserved rooms and reflect on the immense human cost of war and the fragile nature of peace. It reminds us that history is not merely a collection of dates and military maneuvers, but a series of deeply human choices made by individuals caught in the currents of monumental change. Scholars continue to debate the various factors that led to the rapid collapse of the Southern government, but all agree that the final moments inside the palace were a powerful demonstration of the unpredictability of historical events. The legacy of that day continues to shape modern Vietnam, serving as a reminder of the sacrifices made by all sides. It teaches us that the end of conflict is not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of a new, equally challenging chapter of building a shared future from the ruins of the past. The lessons of that transition continue to resonate, offering valuable insights into the challenges of national reconciliation and the enduring power of hope in the face of profound adversity. The final hours inside the Independence Palace on the 30th of April 1975 remain one of the most studied and discussed moments of the 20th century. Every room in that preserved building tells a story of decisions made under extraordinary pressure, of a war's end that changed the course of global history. We want to hear your thoughts on this pivotal moment. How do you view the events that unfolded inside the palace gates on that historic morning? If you or your family have personal memories or stories connected to the events of April 1975, please share them in the comments below, keeping the conversation respectful of all perspectives. Your insights and family histories are incredibly valuable to Environed us as we strive to build a comprehensive, multi-dimensional view of these monumental historical events. If you found this detailed, historical exploration valuable, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you help us continue to produce deeply researched, balanced, and cinematic historical content that brings the rich and complex history of Vietnam to a global audience. Your support allows us to access primary sources, consult with leading historians, and bring these stories to life with the high production values they deserve. We are committed to exploring all aspects of Vietnam's long and fascinating history, from ancient dynasties to modern transitions, and we cannot do it without you. Every like, share, and comment helps the YouTube algorithm recommend our videos to other history enthusiasts around the world, helping us grow a community of curious minds dedicated to understanding the past. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing more stories with you in our next video. Let us continue to learn, discuss, and remember the moments that shaped our world together, ensuring that the lessons of history are never forgotten. By engaging with our content, you become an active part of preserving these vital narratives for future generations, helping to ensure that the complex human stories of our shared past are told with the accuracy, depth, and respect they truly deserve. Together, we can explore the deep currents of history that continue to shape our modern world, one fascinating story at a time.